When my ex called my dad to gloat about his deadweight status, I thought it was just another petty jab. But she had no idea that his struggles included running a billion-dollar tech empire, or that he just signed a deal worth 10 million. The laughter died in her throat when I revealed he was the CEO of a company she had idolized for years. Her smugness evaporated as the truth hit her like a freight train. My name is Vivian. Sometimes the people we underestimate hold the most power. The silence that followed my revelation felt like a heavy blanket smothering the air, wrapping around Olivia, my parents, and me. I could see the gears turning in Olivia's head. Disbelief mixed with embarrassment painted her face. It was as if she was re-evaluating everything she thought she knew about my family, and for a moment, I felt a strange sense of power. I had always been the one trying to navigate the complexities of my family's dynamics, but now I had flipped the narrative. My father, Michael, was no longer just the man who stayed home, the one my mother often criticized for not living up to some undefined standard of ambition. He was a figure of success, someone whose life choices held weight far beyond the trivial labels often thrown around in conversations. My mother, Sarah, stood frozen, her eyes darting between Olivia and Michael, as if expecting him to provide an explanation for the chaos that had just unraveled. I could see the internal struggle on her face, battling pride and resentment as she processed the new information. There was so much history between my parents, years of quiet battles fought behind closed doors, unspoken words that hung heavily in the air whenever they were together. Sarah had often voiced her frustrations about Michael's perceived lack of ambition, and now, facing the reality of his accomplishments, I wondered how she felt. Was she embarrassed for having doubted him, or did it ignite a deeper resentment that she had kept hidden?
"Vivian, this isn't funny," Olivia finally stammered, her voice shaky but defiantly maintaining an edge. "You can't just throw that out there and expect me to believe it." I watched as she struggled to reconcile the Michael she thought she knew with the successful businessman I had just revealed. The realization hit me that Olivia had defined herself through her perception of my family, and now that foundation was crumbling. "Why would I joke about something like this?" I replied, trying to keep my tone steady despite the rising tide of emotions within me. "You don't know him like I do, and clearly you don't know as much as you thought you did." Her eyes narrowed, and I could feel the tension thickening in the room. In that moment, I recognized the depth of her assumptions, how they had blinded her to the complexities of my father's life. Michael finally spoke, his voice calm yet firm. "Olivia, I understand why you might think that way. I've spent years in the background, allowing my work to take a back seat to the family dynamic. But I've made choices that have led me here, to this moment, and it's not fair to label me based on incomplete information." I could see the flicker of admiration in my mother's eyes as she realized Michael was finally standing up for himself. It was a side of him I hadn't seen in a long time, maybe ever. Olivia seemed to struggle with the words, her defenses crumbling as she processed the stark difference between her beliefs and the truth. "So what? You're saying all this time you've been playing a role, acting like you're nothing when you're really something?" There was anger in her voice, but I could sense an underlying current of confusion and regret. She had come to me armed with misconceptions, and now stood disarmed in front of a reality that painted my father in a completely different light. "Not acting," Michael replied, his tone softening, "but choosing to focus on what mattered to me. Sometimes, success isn't about the title you hold, it's about the impact you make. I didn't need a spotlight to validate my work." His words resonated deeply within me, echoing the very sentiments I had been grappling with in my own life. It was a reminder that worth was not determined solely by external validation or societal expectations. As the conversation unfolded, I noticed Sarah's expression shifting. It was as if the weight of years of frustration began to dissipate, revealing a sense of liberation. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I should have listened. I let my fears and insecurities cloud my judgment. The vulnerability in her confession struck me as genuine, and it sparked a flicker of hope within me. Could this be the turning point we all needed? Would my parents finally begin to understand each other, free from the shackles of resentment? Olivia crossed her arms, her bravado waning. "I didn't mean to come in here and cause chaos," she admitted reluctantly. "I just thought maybe I was right about him." I stepped forward, my heart racing as I faced her, confronting the weight of her words. "You were wrong," I said, the conviction in my voice surprising even me. "And your assumptions have consequences. You need to recognize that just because someone doesn't fit your idea of success, it doesn't mean they don't have value." The air was thick with unspoken truths, and I felt a surge of emotions as I finally understood the depth of what had been at stake. This wasn't just about Michael or Olivia. It was about all of us facing the disillusionment of our own perceptions. In a world so focused on appearances and success, we often forget the importance of understanding and compassion. As the weight of the moment settled around us, I realized that this experience, this confrontation, was not only revealing my father's hidden accomplishments, but also unearthing our family's buried truths. It was a moment of reckoning that would force each of us to confront our assumptions and reevaluate our relationships. And in that shared vulnerability, I could sense the possibility of a new beginning, a chance to redefine the connections that bound us together, not through misconceptions, but through authentic understanding. The days following Olivia's comment were a whirlwind of emotions and confessions that left me reeling. I couldn't shake the weight of the truth that had surfaced, and every time I passed my father in the house, I felt a strange mix of admiration and confusion. Michael was not just the man I had known all my life, the dad who had cheered me on from the sidelines at my soccer games and helped with school projects. He was a figure of authority and success that I had never imagined. The more I thought about it, the more questions clouded my mind. Why had he kept this part of himself hidden? Did he think we wouldn't understand? I longed to talk to him, but fear of shattering the fragile peace hung heavy in the air. One evening, I decided I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation any longer. I found Michael sitting in his usual spot on the couch, the faint glow of a lamp illuminating the lines of his face as he read the newspaper. The room felt dense with unspoken words, and I hesitated before taking a seat beside him. His brow furrowed slightly, and he glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "Everything okay, Viv?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of concern. I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out before I could catch them. "I heard what Olivia said about you, and I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me?" His eyes widened, the familiarity of his expression replaced by a vulnerability I had never seen before. For a moment, the silence stretched between us, heavy with the implications of our conversation. Finally, he set the newspaper down, letting out a long sigh. "I didn't want you to see me differently, to feel like you had to live up to some image of success. I thought if I kept that part of my life separate, you could just see me as your dad." I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but the revelation only sparked more questions. "But it's not just about how I see you, it's about who you really are. If you've been so successful, why hide it?" His gaze dropped to his hands, which fidgeted nervously as he searched for the right words. "I grew up with the notion that ambition was a burden. My father was always pushing me to achieve, to be more than I was. I didn't want that for you or your mother. I thought I could provide a different kind of stability." Frustration welled up within me. "But by keeping it hidden, you made it seem like you were doing nothing at all. Mom is already struggling with her own expectations of you. This just adds to the confusion." The heat of the moment surprised me, but I pressed on, determined to get to the heart of the matter. "We've been living with this perception of you that's so far from the truth. Don't you see how it changes everything?"
His expression softened, and he nodded slowly, as if the weight of my words was beginning to settle in. I see that now, but it's complicated. Sarah and I have our own battles, and I didn't want to add to the chaos. I thought I was protecting you both. The reality of his intentions stung, and I felt a rush of empathy mixed with disappointment. But Dad, this isn't just about protecting us, it's about trust. We need to know who you really are. The conversation shifted, and suddenly it wasn't just about Michael anymore. It was about the foundation of our family. The truth had a way of fracturing everything we thought we knew, and I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. I knew I had to speak to my mother too. She had her own set of feelings, many of which remained unaddressed, lingering like shadows in our home. Later that week, I approached Sarah while she was preparing dinner. The aroma of roasted vegetables filled the kitchen, and for a moment, the warmth of home wrapped around me, comforting yet bittersweet. As I sat at the kitchen island, I noticed her hands moving deftly, but her gaze seemed distant, lost in thought. "Mom, can we talk?" I asked gently. She paused, wiping her hands on a dish towel and turning to face me, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" she replied, her voice steady but tinged with apprehension. I hesitated, unsure of how to breach the subject, but then I plunged in. "It's about Dad. I found out he's been keeping a huge part of his life from us, his career. I think it's affected both of you in ways we haven't even talked about." The tension in the room shifted as she processed my words. "I know he hasn't been forthcoming," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, unsure of how to breach the subject, but then I plunged in. "It's about Dad. I found out he's been keeping a huge part of his life from us, his career. I think it's affected both of you in ways we haven't even talked about." The tension in the room shifted as she processed my words. "I know he hasn't been forthcoming," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, unsure of how to breach the subject, but then I plunged in. "It's about Dad. I can't help but feel betrayed. I thought we had built our life on honesty." The vulnerability in her admission struck a chord, and I felt a pang of sadness for her, for us. "Mom, I think he was trying to protect us in his own way, but now it seems like we're all just lost in assumptions," I said, hoping to bridge the gap between them. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she sighed. "I just wanted to know him, to be proud of him, and to share that with you. It's hard to feel that pride when everything feels like a facade." It was a painful acknowledgement, and as she spoke, I realized how trapped we all were in this cycle of misunderstanding. "Can we confront him together?" I asked, desperation in my voice. "We need to stop hiding from each other. It's time to face the truth as a family." Sarah nodded, and for the first time in what felt like ages, we shared a moment of unity, a small yet significant step towards healing. I knew we had a long way to go, but the first breaths of honesty had begun to fill our home, making way for a new understanding. Our family wasn't just a collection of misunderstandings and hidden truths. It was a tapestry woven together by love, and I was determined to help us untangle the threads that had frayed over the years. As I left the kitchen, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where we could redefine who we were as a family, shedding the burdens of the past and embracing the power of authenticity. In that moment, I felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the bonds we forged through honesty would be stronger than the shadows of our past. Stay tuned for the next chapter as we delve deeper into the heart of our family and unravel the secrets that have shaped us. If you're enjoying this journey, consider subscribing for more updates on our story. The days following Olivia's comment felt like a whirlwind, each moment stretching into an eternity of uncertainty and doubt. I watched my parents navigate the fallout from that one careless assumption, each of us gripped by a mix of confusion and latent resentment. My mother, Sarah, was noticeably quieter, her eyes clouded with thoughts she didn't share.
Michael, my father, seemed to retreat into himself, an invisible wall growing between him and the world. I could sense he was struggling beneath the weight of his silence, possibly hiding a truth that could shatter the fragile facade we had all created. One evening, after dinner, I found myself wandering into the living room where Michael sat, staring at the wall as if it held the answers to our family's unraveling. The dim light cast shadows across his face, illuminating the furrows of worry etched into his skin. I hesitated, unsure of what to say, but I knew this was a moment that could not pass without confrontation. "Dad," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk about what Olivia said?" The mention of her name hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. He turned to face me, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "Olivia?" he echoed, his tone cautious. "What about her?" The tension in the room escalated as I took a deep breath, recalling the myriad ways she had misjudged him. "She called you deadweight, and I think it hit you harder than you let on." I watched as his expression shifted, a shadow of pain flickering in his eyes. He looked away, swallowing hard as if the very words were an affront to his very being. "She has her opinions, Vivian," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "People see what they want to see." I could sense a storm brewing beneath his calm exterior, a tempest of emotions ready to break free. It's easier to categorize someone than to understand them fully. I've been labeled more times than I can count. I felt a pang of guilt for my own ignorance. Had I contributed to his isolation by never fully seeing him? But Dad, what if there's more to you? What if Olivia's assumptions are wrong? My voice trembled, a mixture of frustration and a desperate need for truth. "I know there's something about you that we don't understand." For a moment, he remained silent, seemingly wrestling with the words that struggled to escape his lips. "You want the truth? I thought I was protecting you and your mother by keeping parts of my life hidden." I leaned closer, drawn in by his vulnerability. "I didn't want you to see the weight of my decisions, the pressure I felt to succeed in a world that is constantly judging." His admission hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting us in that moment. "But you are successful, aren't you?" I urged, my heart racing. "Why hide it? Why not share it with us?" His eyes met mine, a mixture of anguish and pride flashing across his features. "Because I didn't want you to think my worth came from my title or my position. I wanted you to know me, Michael, your father, without the accolades." The realization washed over me like a wave. He had sacrificed so much in an effort to shield us from the burdens he carried. I could see the man behind the curtain, a father who wanted to be loved for who he was, not for what he achieved. "But it's okay to be both, Dad," I insisted, my conviction growing. "You can be successful and still be the dad I love." He chuckled softly, a bittersweet sound that resonated with sorrow and relief. "I wish it were that simple. You don't know what it's like to be judged by the world, to feel like your accomplishments define you instead of your character." As his words seeped into my mind, I couldn't help but draw parallels to my own life. I had been trying to carve out my identity amidst the chaos of expectations, just like he had. "I think I'm starting to understand," I confessed, my voice trembling. "We've both been caught up in how others perceive us, but we have to break that cycle." In that moment of mutual understanding, the air shifted. I felt a sense of unity, a bridge being built between our experiences. "We can change, Dad. We can start over. It doesn't have to be this way." I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "I want to be there for you, just like you've always been there for me." Tears welled in his eyes as he squeezed my hand back, the warmth of connection wrapping around us like a protective cloak. "I'm not perfect, Vivian," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm willing to try if you are." Just then, Sarah entered the room, her presence grounding us in the moment. I could see the uncertainty flickering in her gaze, and I knew this was an opportunity for all of us to confront our truths. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I exchanged a glance with Michael, and the decision was made in that instant. "We need to talk," I said,
my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and hope. All of us. As we settled into the sofa, an unspoken agreement formed among us. It was time to peel back the layers, to unearth the truths that had been buried for too long. I felt a sense of urgency. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to take the first step into the light of understanding. It was a new beginning, not just for me, but for our entire family, and I was determined to navigate this path together. As we settled into the living room, a heavy silence filled the air, amplifying the weight of unspoken words. I glanced at my parents, their faces a mixture of apprehension and hope, and realized that this conversation was about more than just Michael's identity. It was a reckoning for all of us. I needed to break the silence, to bridge the chasm that had widened over years of misunderstanding. "Dad," I began cautiously, "why didn't you ever tell us about your job? Why did you let us think you were just ordinary?" Michael shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I thought it was better that way," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to feel pressured. I wanted you to live your life, free from expectations tied to my success." His words stung with the realization that he had chosen to hide his accomplishments to protect us from something he believed would crush our spirits. "But you didn't give us a choice, Dad," I countered, feeling the heat of anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You made us feel ashamed for not having ambition when we thought you didn't care to have any." Sarah's eyes welled with tears as she interjected, "I was so focused on our own struggles that I never considered what you might have been going through, Michael. I thought your complacency was a sign of failure." Her voice broke, and I could see the years of unaddressed resentment pouring out like a floodgate bursting open. She had been living with the weight of her assumptions, and the revelation of Michael's life had shattered the fragile narrative she had constructed. "I never wanted you two to see me that way," Michael replied, his tone earnest and tinged with regret. "I thought I could shield you from the pressures of my world. The expectations, the constant scrutiny, they can be suffocating." I watched him grapple with his own vulnerability, and for the first time, I could see the man beneath the surface, the one who had been carrying an invisible burden all along. In that moment, I felt a surge of empathy for both of my parents. Their lives were intertwined with a complex web of expectations and disappointments, and I had been too absorbed in my own perceptions to recognize their struggles. "But it doesn't make sense," I said, my voice steadying as I pressed on. "Why would you hide something so important from us? You could have shown us that ambition doesn't have to equate to sacrifice." "Because sometimes ambition comes at a cost," Michael replied, finally looking me in the eyes. "There's a fine line between success and losing what really matters. I didn't want to lose you both in my pursuit of more." His honesty pierced through my defenses, and I began to understand the depth of his choices, how he had prioritized our family over his own desires. Olivia's voice echoed in my mind. Her flippant remarks about my father had ignited this cascade of revelations, yet they had also forced me to confront my own assumptions. I had projected my insecurities onto Michael, allowing a fleeting judgment to dictate my understanding of him. "You know, Olivia only saw what was on the surface. She didn't know you, Dad," I confessed. "But in some ways, I didn't either. I was too caught up in my own world to see who you really were." "Perhaps we all have things to learn about each other," Sarah said, her tone softening. "We've been living under the weight of societal expectations." And I let it affect how I viewed both of you. I didn't see the man I married. Instead, I saw a reflection of my own insecurities. The admission hung in the air like a delicate thread, and I could sense the shift in our dynamic, a collective acknowledgement of the fractures that had plagued us. As the conversation unfolded, I felt a shift within myself, a growing sense of clarity. I was no longer just the daughter caught in the middle of a family crisis. I was an active participant in the healing process. Maybe we can redefine what success means for us, I suggested, my voice gaining confidence. We can celebrate your achievements, Dad, without it overshadowing who we are as a family. Michael nodded, a flicker of hope illuminating his features. It's a new conversation, one I've been longing to have. I've allowed fear to dictate my actions for too long. I want you both to see that my identity isn't tied solely to my career. The sincerity in his words resonated deeply, inviting an openness I had not expected. And I want to find a way to support each other without the burden of judgment, Sarah added. Let's break the cycle of assumptions that have held us back. It was a profound statement, one that signaled a willingness to embrace vulnerability and honesty within our family. I felt my heart swell with an overwhelming mix of love and gratitude as I looked at my parents. In that moment, I understood that the journey ahead would require patience and commitment, but we were on the brink of something transformative. There was a chance for us to redefine not just how we viewed each other, but how we viewed ourselves. As we continued to talk, the conversation shifted from the past to the possibilities of the future. We began to explore our dreams and aspirations, untangling the threads of ambition from fear and judgment. I could see the walls that had previously separated us beginning to crumble, making way for a newfound intimacy and understanding. In that shared space, I felt the promise of healing, a resolution to embrace who we were and who we could become together. We were no longer just a family grappling with misunderstandings. We were partners in a shared journey, ready to navigate the complexities of life with renewed purpose. As I sat there, surrounded by the warmth of my parents' honesty, I knew we would emerge from this stronger than before, each of us embracing our own truths while holding space for one another. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one where love and understanding would guide us forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through our kitchen window, I felt a sense of urgency wash over me. My parents were finally talking, and I didn't want this moment to slip away. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I could sense the layers of tension beginning to unravel. I cleared my throat, trying to find the right words to bridge the gaps that had formed over the years. "Dad," I began, hesitating only for a moment. "Why didn't you ever tell us about your job? The company, the successes. I mean, you've achieved so much." Michael looked up, his face a mix of surprise and vulnerability. It was as if I had peeled back the layers of his carefully constructed facade. "I didn't want you to see me differently," he replied, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of sadness. "I thought it was enough just to be your father. I didn't want you to think that my worth was tied to my job. I wanted you to see me for who I am, not the title I held." There was a deep sincerity in his words that resonated with me, but it also illuminated the rift between us. I had always seen him as merely a provider, not realizing that he carried the weight of his own insecurities. Sarah, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. "But Michael, we needed to know," she said, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Your silence made me feel like you were hiding." "I've always felt lost trying to balance my own aspirations while supporting you." Her voice cracked, and I felt the heaviness of her truth. It was like a mirror reflecting all the times I had felt trapped under the weight of expectations, her expectations and my own. As the discussion unfolded, I realized how deeply intertwined their lives had become, rooted in their individual struggles. "What if we started fresh?" I suggested, my heart pounding at the idea. "What if we set aside our past resentments and fears and just understood each other?" A flicker of hope ignited in the room, and I could see my parents contemplating the idea. "We can redefine what it means to be a family, one that supports each other unconditionally," I added, finding the courage to suggest a path forward.
Michael nodded slowly, his expression transforming into one of contemplation. "That sounds like a good idea, Vivian," he said finally. "I've held back so much, thinking it would protect us, but it's only caused more distance." He reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand gently in his own. "I want to be honest with you, with both of you. I want us to build a relationship grounded in trust." His voice was calm, but I could sense the turbulence beneath. Sarah squeezed his hand, a smile breaking through her somber demeanor. "And I want to be honest with myself," she admitted, her gaze shifting to me. "I've spent too much time focusing on what I thought I should be, instead of embracing who I truly am." The weight of her confession lingered in the air. I felt a rush of compassion for both of my parents, recognizing the struggles they faced as individuals. In that moment, I realized we were all just trying to navigate our identities within the framework of familial expectations. I had placed my own assumptions on my father, viewing him through the lens of someone who lacked ambition, while he was wrestling with the fear of not being seen as enough. "Maybe we can share our dreams and fears, as uncomfortable as it might be," I suggested, wanting to create a safe space for all of us. "I want to know what you both aspire to, what truly makes you feel fulfilled." Michael glanced at me, then at Sarah, contemplating the invitation. "I want to travel more," he confessed after a pause, his eyes lighting up. "I've always dreamed of seeing the world, not just from the boardroom. I want to experience life outside of work." His admission surprised me, unveiling a side of him I had never considered. Meanwhile, Sarah shared her own aspirations, speaking of a desire to write and pursue art, expressing a longing that had been buried beneath her responsibilities. As we began sharing these hidden parts of ourselves, I felt the barriers dissolve, replaced by a newfound openness. I realized that we were not just a family bound by blood, but by our shared vulnerabilities and dreams. Each revelation brought us closer, igniting conversations that had long been dormant. I felt a warmth spread through me as I saw my parents begin to connect on a deeper level, their hearts slowly mending in the process. Despite the struggles ahead, I felt optimistic. It was clear that we had the power to redefine our relationships, to create a new narrative that celebrated our individuality while honoring our family bond. As I listened to Michael and Sarah discuss their dreams, I couldn't help but wonder about my own path. What did I truly want? How could I weave my aspirations into this new tapestry we were creating? In the midst of our conversation, I felt compelled to reach out to Olivia. It was important for me to clarify my feelings and the misunderstandings that had arisen from her assumptions about my father. I wanted her to see the man I had come to know so intimately over the past few hours. "I think I need to talk to Olivia," I said, a sense of determination brewing within me. "I need her to understand the real Michael." My parents exchanged glances, a blend of support and concern in their eyes. "Go ahead," Sarah encouraged gently, her voice reassuring. "We'll be here when you get back. This is your journey too." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief as I stepped outside, ready to confront the misunderstandings that had sparked this family crisis. It was a pivotal moment, one where I could advocate for my father and, in turn, for the family I was beginning to appreciate in a whole new light. As the cool evening air wrapped around me, I felt a deep gratitude for the vulnerability we had shared and the potential for change that lay ahead. I knew this wouldn't be the end of our challenges, but it was a beginning, a chance to redefine not only how we saw each other, but how we understood ourselves. I couldn't wait to hear stories from others who had faced similar struggles. Sharing our experiences could only deepen our connections and foster a sense of community in our truths. As the days passed after that pivotal conversation, I found myself reflecting more on my family dynamics. The tension between my parents, previously a background hum in my life, now stood out like an obnoxious alarm bell. I would catch glances between them during meals, moments where words lingered unspoken in the air, and an unshakable weight pressed down on our small dining table. I realized that my mother, Sarah, had been battling her own demons. The revelation of my father, Michael's, true identity had shaken her core beliefs.
The image she had painted of him, the slacker living off the grid, had been shattered, and she was left to reconcile her past assumptions with this newfound reality. One evening, I decided it was time for a heart-to-heart. I had noticed how my mother often retreated to her favorite chair after dinner, clutching a mug of herbal tea as if it were a lifeline. I approached her cautiously, the air thick with unaddressed feelings. "Mom, can we talk?" I asked, my voice wavering just slightly. She looked up, her brow furrowing in mild surprise. I sat down across from her, heart pounding, ready to dive into the murky waters of our collective emotions. Her eyes reflected a swirl of confusion and pain as I broached the topic of my father's hidden life. "I think we both need to unpack what this means for us," I started, searching for the right words. "I know the shock must be hard to process, but I want to understand how you feel about it." For a moment, she hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, lost in thought. Eventually, she sighed deeply, and the facade of composure began to crack. "It just feels like a betrayal, Vivian," she finally admitted, her voice trembling. "All these years, I thought I was doing the right thing, building a life with someone who was committed, but now it feels like I was living with a stranger." Her candor washed over me, revealing the hurt beneath the surface. I could sense the bitterness in her words, echoing a lifetime of unfulfilled dreams and unspoken resentments. As she spoke, I couldn't help but notice the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. It was as if I was peeling back layers of her carefully constructed reality. "But Dad isn't who we thought he was. He's so much more," I countered softly, trying to bridge the gap. Maybe he was trying to protect us in his own way, or maybe he didn't know how to share this part of himself. She looked at me, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And what about you? How do you feel about this revelation? Your father's life was a lie to us both." I opened my mouth to respond, but caught myself. My feelings were complicated, a mix of pride for his achievements and resentment for his secrecy. "I don't know, Mom. It's overwhelming. I feel like I've been living in a story that was only half written." In that moment, I understood that we were both grappling with a painful truth. It was not just about Michael's identity. It was about the trust we had placed in our family structure. As my mother and I began to navigate this emotional landscape together, we found common ground in our shared confusion. The walls between us seemed to weaken as we acknowledged the complexities of our relationship. Later that week, I invited Olivia over, hoping that reconnecting with her could somehow help ease the tension at home. I was nervous about how she would react to my father's true identity and the implications it had on her previous judgments. When she arrived, there was a palpable awkwardness in the air, a tension that felt almost electric. I led her into the living room, where my parents were already seated. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and I could sense my mother's apprehension as Olivia took a seat across from her. "Vivian's told me a lot about what's been going on," Olivia started, her voice steady but eyes darting between us. "I wanted to apologize for my assumptions about your family." I watched my mother's face soften slightly at Olivia's acknowledgement, but the tension remained. "I had no idea about your father's accomplishments," Olivia continued, her eyes now fixed on Michael. "I think it's incredible what you've built." Michael shifted in his seat, and for a moment, I could see the flicker of discomfort in his expression. This was new territory for him, the chance to be seen in a light he had kept hidden for so long. "Thank you, Olivia," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor of uncertainty beneath it. "It's been a journey." A silence fell over the room, the kind that begged for someone to fill it with words. I could sense the wake of unspoken feelings hanging in the air. Finally, I decided to take the plunge. "Olivia, it's important that we all understand each other better," I interjected, feeling the intensity rise. "There's so much that's been left unsaid, and this is our chance to do better." The conversation flowed from there, like a river finally breaking free from a dam. We all began to share our perspectives, each voice weaving into the tapestry of our shared experience. My mother opened up about her frustrations, Michael spoke candidly about his struggles with ambition and perception, and Olivia shared her own journey of misjudgment. It was as if the act of speaking had lifted a veil of misunderstanding that had clouded our lives for far too long. Through those discussions, I realized that rebuilding trust was a multifaceted endeavor. Each of us had to confront our own biases and expectations while allowing space for growth and healing. The conversations didn't offer immediate resolution, but they ignited a spark of hope. As I looked around the room at my family, flawed yet resilient, I felt a profound sense of connection. We were all learning, not just about one another, but about ourselves. In this tangled web of relationships, I began to see the threads of understanding pulling us closer together, a reminder that sometimes the journey toward clarity begins in the chaos.